14.11 is jam-packed with a little bit of everything, as we've got nerfs to OP picks like Jinx and Karthus, buffs to some of the more struggling champs like Master Yi and Gangplank, while a bunch of items and runes are being adjusted as well. So in today's video, we'll be providing you guys with a tier list for every single role in patch 14.11. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date, and so you don't miss out on next week's changes. And remember, if you're struggling to climb in League, SkillCapped is the only place that guarantees you'll climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. Otherwise, you can claim a full refund. We do this because our service really works, and this is the best time of the season to get in on SkillCapped, as we've just released tons of site-exclusive courses designed for you to power learn the most important concepts for climbing in League of Legends stupidly fast, compared to those who don't use SkillCapped. Join today for unlimited access to the world's most famously effective League of Legends guides, and remember, one subscription gives you access to all of our other games as well. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below to stop wasting time being hard stuck and get the rank you actually want. And with that said, let's get into it. As always, let's start off the tier list by covering all the item and rune adjustments and discuss which champs will be influenced the most. Infinity Edge is going to be nerfed in 14.11 with its bonus crit damage dropping from 50 to 40%. To be straight up, IE was overtuned in 14.10, and even after this change, we still believe it will be a really strong pickup. Since so many crit ADCs have been running Infinity Edge, it's more of an indirect nerf to the role as a whole than a nerf to a few specific ADCs. Static Shiv landed extremely underpowered after its 14.10 rework, so Riot has multiple buffs planned for this patch. AD and attack speed are both being increased, the cost will be lowered by 100 gold, passive minion damage is going up, and there will now be 7% movement speed on Shiv. So lots of buffs here, and if you hadn't been following 14.10 very closely, you'd probably see this and think that Shiv will just be OP now. That's likely not going to be the case, because if you take a look at just how poorly Shiv was performing on ADCs throughout 14.10, these buffs are definitely warranted. The item heavily underperformed every other rush item, as Sivir and Zeri players who have been rushing Shiv were only winning 41% of the time. In comparison, IE rush on Zeri has been winning 49% of the time. So with these buffs, Riot's looking to bring Static Shiv's win rate up by at least 7%, hence why the changes are so massive. Riot wants Shield Bow to be a more attractive early to mid-game pickup for 14.11, so the level scaling on the shield will start at level 8 instead of level 11. The shield is also being buffed, as it's going from 320 scaling to 530 to 320 scaling to 720. Yone is definitely the most obvious winner from these buffs, as he had already been slotting in Shield Bow as a second purchase to some good success in 14.10. Samira, Yasuo, Nilah, Graves, and Zeri are also a few other champs that we should expect to like these changes the most. Other than Static Shiv, Essence Reaver has been the second weakest ADC item, so it's getting a buff for next patch, with the cost being reduced from 3,200 to 3,100 gold. So a very small buff to champs like Smolder, Gangplank, and Corki, but in the grand scheme of things, we don't expect this buff to significantly alter the strength of any champion. The Collector is being hit with a nerf, as its lethality is dropping from 15 down to 12. This one is actually quite interesting, because the item was already hotfix nerfed in 14.10, with its cost being increased, so this is now a second nerf. Samira and Nilah are two champs who have been rushing the Collector in pretty much every single game, so they'll be negatively impacted the most. As for picks like Jhin, Caitlyn, and Draven, we wouldn't be surprised if they stop building the Collector and opt for alternatives. Draven, for example, should just rush Bloodthirster now, as it had already been outperforming the Collector prior to these nerfs. Both Cait and Jhin can look to rush Infinity Edge instead, and then go into Rapid Fire Cannon and completely bypass the Collector. For a jungler like Graves, a really interesting build for next patch could consist of Bloodthirster with Shield Bow. The Collector had been the most common second pickup on Graves in 14.10, but a Bloodthirster rush into Shield Bow sounds really nice on paper with how everything's playing out. Of course, all this is just theory crafting for now, and we'll have to see how impactful this nerf to the Collector lands when it hits live servers. There are two runes that will be adjusted for this patch, and Absorb Life is one of them. The healing on the rune is being increased, and we're a bit surprised that the rune is even being buffed in the first place, because it has been performing very well on certain champions. Yasuo, Yone, and Aurelia are three champs who have been excelling with Absorb Life in 14.10, so it's definitely going to be a must pick up rune on them moving forward. Even on a bunch of ADCs, Absorb Life had been winning at a very similar rate to Triumph, so ideally with these changes we should see more swapping between Triumph and Absorb Life based on the lane that you're in. In more difficult lanes where you need to survive, Absorb Life will be more valuable, but in lanes where you want to play super aggro, Triumph will come into play more often. Riot completely reworked Cut Down in 14.10 so that you now deal bonus damage when the enemy is above a certain health threshold. That threshold is being lowered for 14.10 as it's dropping from 60 to 50%, which is a buff. What this means is that as long as the enemy is above 50% health, you'll be dealing bonus damage to them. So Cut Down is definitely going to be the rune you'll want to run on ADC when up against a comp who's got heavy health stackers. Coup de grace will still be good as well, but it will be better suited in games where the enemy comp is more squishy and you won't need as much DPS to take them down. To try and prevent lane swapping in pro play, Riot will be buffing up the durability of mid and top lane towers for this patch. Prior to 5 minutes, top and mid lane towers had been 50% more difficult to take down in 14.10, but that number is being increased to 75% for 14.11. It's been quite a long time since we've seen Gnar in the top lane meta for solo queue, so Riot has a couple of buffs lined up for him. Gnar's AD growth is going to be increased from 3 to 3.2, while his Q-AD ratio in mini form is going up from 115 to 125%. So nothing too major here for Gnar. Buffs will bring him up in power slightly, so we're shifting him from B to A tier, but he's not going to become a top tier pick as a result of these changes. Ezzin's Reaver rework completely destroyed Gangplank to say the least, so Riot has some small buffs planned for him in 14.11. Health is going up from 600 to 630, while armor per level is up from 4.2 to 4.7. In all honesty, these are pretty underwhelming buffs, and when you take into account that the Collector and Infinity Edge are being nerfed as well, the cumulative outcome of 14.11 won't even be that positive for GP. As a result, we will not be moving Gangplank further up the tier list for this patch, as he'll remain in the C tier. Nasus ended up losing quite a bit of strength in 14.10 due to the ghost nerfs and removal of the Tenacity rune, so Riot's giving him a few buffs. AD growth is being increased from 3.5 to 4. E armor shred is up from 25 scaling to 45% to 30 scaling to 50%. E mana cost is also buffed, going from 70 scaling to 130 to 60 scaling to 100. Like the changes to Gnar, we don't expect for these to land too over the top for Nasus, but they'll still be relatively impactful, so we're moving him out of B tier and into A. Singed is another top laner who was fried pretty hard by the ghost nerfs and Tenacity rune removal, so he's getting a couple of buffs. QAP ratio per second is going up from 40 to 42.5%. R cooldown is being reduced from 120 scaling to 100 to just 100 flat at all ranks. 20 seconds off of R at level 6 will feel quite nice, as the skirmish strength of the champ is just so heavily amplified when he has the spell available. So these buffs should help to land Singed back in a good spot for 14.11, and he's being pushed up from B into A tier. It's almost like Pantheon's getting a mini rework for 14.11, as his W and E are being changed in pretty big ways. W damage is being changed from a flat amount to now dealing 5 scaling to 7% max health damage. As you can see in the background clips, this is a damage nerf early on when you have Eclipse completed. E is being changed so that you gain bonus armor and magic resist for 4 seconds after recasting the spell. So it looks like with these changes, Riot really wants to solidify Pantheon as more of a fighter. In the past, we've seen full lethality builds on the champ, but especially with the percent health damage being added to W, going for a more health stacking build should become more viable. It may take a patch or two for players to adapt to this new Pantheon, as like we noted earlier, damage is actually lower on W when you rush Eclipse, so a Black Cleaver or Sundered Sky Rush is something that should gain more strength moving forward. As for Pantheon's tier list placement, it's tough to say exactly where he will land power-wise, but we do expect him to be stronger, so we're moving him from B into A tier. Aurelia has benefited quite a bit from 14.10, as the Blade of the Ruined King, Kraken Slayer, and Absorb Life changes were all really good for her. Riot's looking to bring her down a notch for this patch, as her health growth is being reduced from 124 to 115. So more of a low elo skewed nerf here, as any scaling change is always going to affect low elo more than high elo due to games on average lasting longer. With this nerf, we'll be bumping Aurelia down 1 tier, moving her from S into A tier. Mordekaiser has been excelling in the lower ranks as of recent, so he's being issued some scaling nerfs. Passive base damage per second is dropping from 5 scaling to 15 to 5 flat. Q base damage is being changed so that it's pretty similar early on, but will become more nerfed the longer games last. Pretty impactful nerfs to Mordekaiser, especially to his passive damage, as it's the only damage in his kit other than auto attacks that is guaranteed, so the drop off later in the game will be felt. So Mord is going to be shifted down 1 tier for next patch, as we're moving him from S into A. Riot's looking to shift some power around in Kassante's kit, so let's have a look at what they've cooked up. Q mana cost is going to be buffed, as it's lowered from 28 scaling to 20 to just 20 flat. W max charge time is being lowered from 1.5 to 1 second, while the damage reduction from W is nerfed from 40 scaling to 65% to 30% at all ranks. RW damage reduction is also down from 50 scaling to 75% to 60% at all ranks. R healing will be buffed, as it's increased from 10 scaling to 20% to 15 scaling to 25%. So overall, less defensive power for Cassante next patch, while his offensive capabilities are buffed. We don't really see these being huge net positive adjustments for Cassante, so we won't be shifting him up the tier list, as he'll remain in C. So if we have a look at how the top lane tier list is shaping out, OP tier will consist of 3 champs being Urgot, Set, and Tryndamere. Set and Tryndamere have both turned out to be really big winners from 14.10, and with Camille losing strength due to her direct nerfs, they'll only become even higher priority. Set has shot up mainly due to his immense synergy with Overlord's Bloodmail, as it's the perfect third item for the champ. Tryndamere has been loving the new Phantom Dancer, and even though you'd think he would end up losing strength due to lethal tempo being removed, Grasp has taken its place and is performing exceptionally well. IE being nerfed will hurt Tryndamere slightly, but he doesn't purchase the item until third, so the early to mid game of the champ is not affected. And before we head into the jungle, let's boost your win rate with SkillCapped's tip of the week. Wave management will often come down to subtle moves that you may or may not be paying attention to in your games, and a big one people don't abuse enough is playing around minion aggro. First, let's explain how aggro works. The enemy minion wave will automatically target you whenever you damage an enemy champion with a single target spell or auto attack. Something to note is that they will not target you if you damage someone with a non-targeted ability. Okay, so depending on your goal in the lane, you can abuse this to take advantage of the wave in your favor. For example, early on, if you want to push, you may want to auto attack your opponent once. The reason why is that the enemy wave will begin targeting you. This means that the enemy minions are not damaging your own wave anymore, while your own wave is still hitting their minions. As you can see, even with a single auto where minions changed aggro for a moment, this caused the wave to push favorably for us in the long run. Remember, this can also work against you. If you don't want a wave to push, then you may want to limit how often you're drawing aggro. Otherwise, what we just talked about will happen. Another really smart tactic you can pull off with this is to sometimes bait your opponent to hit you with a spell or auto attack. If you're in a tough matchup, this may cause the wave aggro to force the wave to push towards you, which will allow you to play safe while the wave pushes into you. If you want to learn more game-changing wave control tips like these, then take our new Season 14 Wave Control course at SkillCapped. You can check it out with the link in the description below. So, moving on to jungle now, we have 4 champs who will be adjusted. Kha'Zix had been battered down by indirect changes last patch, as the adjustments to First Strike and removal of Futures Market did not bode well for him. To help him out, Riot will be buffing his Q damage, as the base is going up by 10 at all ranks. Pretty solid stuff overall, especially for a point-and-click ability. Should be enough to bring Kha'Zix out of the bottom percentile, so we're moving him from B into A tier. Master Yi has been repeatedly nerfed in the past while, as Riot directly nerfed him a few patches back, and then lethal tempo being removed really hurt the champ as well. As a result, we have multiple buffs lined up for Yi this patch, as his health growth, AD growth, armor growth, and attack speed growth are all being increased. These changes will definitely help out Yi a lot more for the lower ranks, as every single change revolves around his scaling. Changes should be enough to push Master Yi back into a viable spot for solo queue, so we're moving him out of C tier and into B. Blackfire Torch users have been absolutely dominating the meta in 14.10, and one of the most notable has been Karthus. As a result, Karthus is being nerfed for this patch, with his Q damage dropping. At the very start of the patch, pre-Blackfire hotfix, Karthus was up around a 55% win rate, but then after the hotfix went live, he settled out around 51%. With this nerf, we definitely don't expect him to be OP anymore, and we'll be shifting him out of the OP tier and into S. Talia is next in line for a nerf, as very much like Karthus, she has enjoyed 14.10 being able to abuse Blackfire. The nerf that Riot will be issuing is to Talia's Q, as the damage on the spell is being lowered. So, like Karthus, main damage tool is being hit, which will have a significant impact on all facets of Talia's game, and we'll be moving her out of OP tier and into S. So very much like top lane, jungle tier list is being scrambled up for 14.11, as we have a brand new look to the OP tier. With Karthus and Talia dropping down, it's now Lilia, Rek'Sai, and Xin Zhao as the OP carries. Xin Zhao and Rek'Sai were both indirectly buffed in 14.10 due to the Black Cleaver changes, and are really powerful for the current meta due to their reliable early game impact. It's pretty easy to execute ganks with both champs, and with how much more important snowballing bot lane has become due to the ADC item buffs, playing Xin or Rek'Sai and being able to influence the early game is really good right now. As for Lilia, she avoids nerfs despite being a really strong Blackfire Torch user, and is especially strong for the lower elos, so she's definitely who we'd recommend you play if you want to take advantage of Blackfire Torch in 14.11. It's a pretty light patch for mid lane in 14.11, with Hui nerfs being the highlight. QQ health ratio is going down from 4 scaling to 8% to 3 scaling to 7%. QEAP ratio is dropping as well from 62.5 to 50%. We had moved Hui up into the S tier for 14.10 due to how strong the champ has been with Blackfire Torch, but we'll be shifting him right back down due to these nerfs, as we're dropping Hui into A tier. So just a few changes being issued to the mid lane tier list, as we're making one adjustment to the OP tier, moving Uxin up to join Brand and Vex. Uxin has turned out to be a pretty big winner from the Blade of the Ruined King and Kraken Slayer changes from 14.10. The core Blade and Kraken should become even higher priority for this patch as well, with the Collector and Infinity Edge nerfed. With Uxin's reset mechanic on E, the new changes to press the attack are super nice for him too. If you guys are unaware, you now gain the 8% damage amp on all targets after proccing the rune. So when you kill that first target and then move on to the second, your damage is higher than before now. We already covered the Aurelia and Taliyah nerfs when going over top lane and jungle, but the changes will negatively impact them for mid lane as well, so we're going to be dropping both champs down from S into A tier. Syndra deserves a push up the tier list as she's been really liking the Blackfire Torch rush and has been performing much better since the item's introduction. New First Strike is also quite nice for Syndra as she can proc the rune very reliably with her Q in lane and stack up a bunch of bonus gold earlier on now to hit a quicker mid-game spike. There are 4 ADCs who will be adjusted this patch, and first up is Draven, who's getting a couple of buffs. Passive base gold on kill is going up from 10 to 25, while the passive stacks that you lose on death are dropping from 75 to 50%. Draven ended up losing a lot more power than Riot had wanted from his hotfix nerfs from 14.10, so these changes should bring him back into a solid spot for this patch, and he'll be placed in the A tier. Smolder has been by far the weakest ADC in 14.10, so he's receiving a few buffs as a result. Base AD is being increased from 57 to 60. Q mana cost is being lowered from 23 scaling to 35 to 25 flat. Q bonus damage per crit chance is also being increased. To be honest, we just don't see how these changes will be enough to significantly increase Smolder's solo Q strength, considering he's been a 44% win rate champ in 14.10, so he's going to remain in the ADC C tier. Jinx has been the best solo Q ADC for quite some time now, and that probably doesn't change for 14.11. Jinx is being nerfed with her AD per level dropping, but that's all she's receiving. For now, we're going to be leaving Jinx in the ADC OP tier, but there's a chance that the nerf is enough to warrant a push into S, so we'll circle back if need be for the mid-patch tier list. Heavy AD Caitlyn builds are being nerfed pretty hard for 14.11. W headshot bonus AD ratio is being lowered from 40 scaling to 80% to just 40% flat. Our AD ratio is nerfed as well, going from 170 to 150%. To compensate, Caitlyn's attack speed ratio is going up. So it looks like Riot wants to push Cait towards a more attack speed focused build, as Phantom Dancer priority will rise for 14.11. Especially with the Collector being nerfed as well, it's quite likely we see Cait drop the item entirely and prioritize an Infinity Edge rush with either Phantom Dancer or Fire Cannon second. Even though Riot's marking these changes off as adjustments and not nerfs, we do think she's going to be losing quite a bit of strength for 14.11 and are dropping her down into the ADC B tier. The heavy AD builds have just been so much more powerful for solo queue, so even though attack speed builds have more value now, the relative strength of Cait should be much weaker. So if we have a look at the ADC tier list, Jhin and Jinx will remain on top as the OP champs. We don't expect for the Infinity Edge and Collector nerfs to hurt that bad, especially considering how much crit ADCs had already been outperforming on hit ADCs in 14.10. Static shift buffs will be interesting to track because there's a lot of power being added to the item, but since the item was just so awful in 14.10, it's tough to say if the buffs will even be enough to bring it into parity with the likes of Infinity Edge or Kraken as a rush option. Shield Bow as a rush or even a second pickup on the likes of Samira or Neela could have some viability this patch as well due to its buffs. With the Collector being hit with nerfs and both of those champs rushing the item in recent patches, it will be interesting to see if Shield Bow can now compete as an alternative rush option. Bot lane Corki is one to watch out for in 14.11 as he's been performing very well ever since his hotfix buffs, and with Essence Reaver buffed this patch, he's getting even better. Enchanter supports that like to build Shirelias ended up losing a bit more power than Riot had hoped in 14.10, so they are buffing up Lulu in specific. Our knock-up duration is being increased from 0.75 to 1 second, while cooldown of the spell is buffed as well, going from 120 to 100 seconds. Decent buffs overall, but we just don't think they will be quite enough to push Lulu back into S tier territory, so we'll be leaving her in A for 14.11. With how much Nami is already being prioritized in solo queue, it's very odd to see her receiving multiple direct buffs for 14.11. Maybe one buff would make sense, but she's getting 3. Base AD is going up from 51 to 54. W mana cost is going down at max rank from 110 to 90. R slow is being changed so that it's now just 70% flat instead of 50 scaling to 70%. So with Nami dipping out of the S tier for one patch, she'll be sliding right back up for 14.11. Support role was least impacted by the 14.11 changes, so there isn't really much new to discuss in regards to the outlook on the meta. OP tier will stay the same as where we had it in 14.10, with Braum, Rel, and Leona leading the way. For now, it's going to be melee supports that are the more dominant archetype for the solo queue meta. Choosing a support with playmaking potential and being able to execute well with them gives you a much greater chance at snowballing your ADC into their buffed items. Braum is kind of that nice happy medium right now, as he's a support with a very strong early game skirmish while possessing some nice defensive attributes as well. well. When your jungler is ganking early on, you have the ability to set up ganks really nicely to get the ball rolling, and then later on in the game, peeling off enemy carries with R and blocking damage with E helps to keep your fed carry nice and safe. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit skillcapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it guys, a complete look at the solo queue tier list for every single role as we head into patch 14.11. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.